What is up, everybody? This is your boy, Teran Rodriguez, bringing you another edition of Set Point. And we have quite a busy show today, as we had quite a bit happening last week, such as Washington State upsetting Oregon. How did the Cougars do it? And is this the biggest victory of the season? Probably not, because they beat Washington. And how about UConn? The Huskies getting their first ever ranked victory over an opponent as they topped Creighton in 5 sets. Good job to the UConn Huskies. The Big East is becoming a battle. And how about the Black and Blue Rivalry as UC Irvine tops Long Beach State the day after they got, I wouldn't say humiliated against Cal State Fullerton, but just humbled. I will be talking about that in a little bit. Also, we'll talk about this week's big-time matchup. There's plenty of them, and they could determine who wins the conference and who doesn't. So, set up the net, hand me a volleyball, because I'm about to serve you some volleyball action here on Set Point. This is Teran Rodriguez bringing you another edition of Set Point here on iSports Radio, your direction for all that is sports. And what is good, volley peeps of all ages? Thank you all for tuning in to this beautiful Monday afternoon, and thank you all for tuning in to Set Point. I appreciate you all tuning in, and happy Monday to everybody. I appreciate the support and for all of our shows on IE Sports Radio. And without any further delay, let's get on into some volleyball action. But first, we have some sponsors to go over. So, the first sponsor from IE Sports Radio is the Southern California Warriors semi-pro football team. Unfortunately for the Warriors, they dropped a tough one to the Inland Empire Kings, which was the second loss to them this season. But they are 4-4 as they have 2 more games remaining. Here's hoping the Warriors can finish on a high note. If they get 1 out of 2 wins, that'd be great. If they get 2 out of 2 wins, that'd be awesome. I just want them to finish strong because the SoCal Warriors are a great semi-pro football team. Anyway, the world of semi-pro sports is unlike any other sports organization. Players pay to play in order for so many different outcomes, whether it's playing to get filmed to try out for professional teams, big-time colleges, or just playing to stay in shape. No matter what, all semi-pro players have one thing in common, and that's the love for the game that they play for. The SoCal Warriors have been on a quest to earn titles and give players second chances since 2017. Whether you're in Southern California or anywhere in the world, give semi-pro sports a chance if you love your sport. You may get that second chance you have been waiting for as an athlete. You could follow the Warriors on Twitter at SoCal Warriors, and you can follow them on Instagram at SouthernCalifornia_Warriors. You could also follow them on Facebook by typing in the word Southern, then space, California, then space, then Warriors. And then you'll have your link to their Facebook page. The second sponsor for IE Sports Radio is Background Check International Businesses. Are you looking to background check a new hire on? Let Kit Fremen take care of that for you. Kit founded and has managed Background Check International since 1994, and he's here to help you with the screening process. Contact Kit and let him help make the hiring process that much easier. This business is used for professional background checks and not for the use of any crimes such as identity theft or any other illegal activity. Unfortunately, BCI does not have a Twitter or an Instagram, but they have Facebook by typing in the word background, space, check, space, international, space, then dash, then space, BCI. And that's how you'll be able to support them. And they also have their website, www.bcint.com. So thank you to BCI for being the official sponsor of iSports Radio as well as the SoCal Warriors. We appreciate your support for our station. It is much greatly appreciated as we welcome Larry B in the chat room. Thank you for tuning in. He says volleyball. Yep, volleyball indeed. So now that we have all that out of the way, let's get on into the segment I like to call Quick Sets, aka the recap of last weekend. So we're going to start off with, let's actually start off a little bit differently real quick. Sorry, just had a little bit of a sneeze go my way. All right, so now let's get on into some volleyball action. So last weekend, I actually went to UC Irvine, aka the Brent Event Center, to go to check out Long Beach State women's volleyball against UC Irvine. It was the first meeting of the Black and Blue Rivalry. And this rivalry isn't as big as like some of the other rivalries like USC, UCLA, Stanford, Cal, Colorado, Utah, Creighton, Marquette. You get the point. So this rivalry is a little bit unknown. It's basically UC Irvine versus Long Beach State, and they kind of make this whole rivalry like deep when it comes to like all sports, not just for volleyball, but for every sport like soccer and then track and field and whatnot. So there you go. So for this matchup in women's volleyball, this is actually the first meeting between these two teams since 2019. Last year, the Beach took the season series against UC Irvine 2-0. They swept them both times, which I kind of expected just because UC Irvine doesn't really have the greatest team, but neither does Long Beach State. It's not a knock to either team, don't get me wrong, but I will say this. I think that both teams are having fantastic seasons. They're not having bad seasons, but they're certainly not having the greatest seasons. Like, one of those two teams, if not both, are probably not going to be winning the Big West Conference unless they go on a big tear through the remainder of the season. And again, it's no knock on both those teams. Like, Long Beach State has played a tough schedule as they have played teams like San Diego and then UCLA and then Georgia Tech and then Washington State. And they did beat San Diego, but they haven't really done the best in conference play. And then UC Irvine has a record above 500 ever since they came in. Well, when they came in, they had a record above 500, but they were coming off of a disappointing loss to Cal State Fullerton. They got swept the night before. I don't understand how they got swept. It's like, it makes no sense because Fullerton isn't even on the level of UC Irvine. And that's no knock to Fullerton because they obviously earned the victory, but it was so weird. And I'm thinking, okay, probably Long Beach State is going to win this matchup. No doubt about it. As we say hello to Davidson Crooks, he says, "What's good? Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate you." Davidson Crooks was on the primetime face-off of 3 and Out, which was hosted by Larry B, so I appreciate you two quickly popping in. Back to the Long Beach State UC Irvine women's volleyball match. So this matchup, I basically thought, okay, I think Long Beach is going to win in 4. I think no more than 4. I think that's what I thought to myself. And I think Long Beach is a little bit more battle-tested. They have the horses. And personally, I think they definitely have the momentum going into this match. Because if Irvine couldn't even beat Fullerton, then I don't know how they're going to counteract Kashana Williams. Turns out that UC Irvine had a better game plan. So the first set, Long Beach State took 25-19, which Long Beach was off to a solid start. Kashana Williams didn't register her first kill, but Katie Kennedy was outstanding on the right side, and she even got to slide in the middle position. It just going to show you how deep Long Beach State was. And UC Irvine was only banking on, Joy Ume on getting kills. And it wasn't really the biggest recipe for success for the Anteaters, as Long Beach took the first set. The second set actually went totally different, as UC Irvine got off to a much faster start. They were up I think it was like 4-0, 5-0. They never once trailed. Actually, no, it was tied because Long Beach State did manage to get the score tied at 17 apiece, but they couldn't get any closer because they kept making self-inflicted wounds, like missing serves. Like, the missed serves was what really hurt them. And then also, UC Irvine was getting timely placed kills and stops when it needed to. UC Irvine took the second set 25-21. The third set was rather tight as UC Irvine led early on, but then Long Beach State was able to just storm through that third set. They took it 25-21, and something to note was that Kashana Williams was not having her best night. That Kashana, I won't say I didn't look like she played hurt, but it looked as if Irvine had a great game plan to slow her down, and they really did, as she was getting stopped at the net more times than not. I think it took her until set number 3 to get her first kill of the night, and she was able to do so. And then in Kashana's defense, she was coming off of a night where she registered her 1,000th kill with Long Beach State, so that was impressive stuff. But against UC Irvine, the Anteaters had a better plan for her, but Long Beach State had players that could like step up, such as Miranda Conyes, Erica Lovett. Even Tia Chavira, the setter, was swinging from the right side. So honestly, I think Long Beach State has depth, but I think they didn't adapt to UC Irvine's blocking and stopping of Kashana Williams. So that was kind of a thing as well. So Long Beach State still took the third set 25-21, and they led the match 2-1. And then the fourth set, Long Beach State led 4-0. And I'm thinking, okay, it looks like Long Beach is back on track. And then they just could not stop the tough serving from Ellen Virgassen, as she ripped off 2 straight service aces. And it was not good for Long Beach State. Actually, no, it was Mariana Bertolone. So my apologies. It was Mariana Bertolone with the 2 service aces. And that eventually helped key the Anteaters to take the lead against Long Beach State. And they never really surrendered the lead after that. Like, Long Beach State tried to get the lead back, but UC Irvine just had an answer for them every step of the way. As UC Irvine took the fourth set 25-21, forcing a fifth set. Now, the fifth set was kind of like a boxing match. It was like 1 point after another. It was basically just blow after blow. Long Beach State led 7-6, but then UC Irvine scored 2 straight points to get the lead at 8-7, and that was basically the turning point. Long Beach State eventually had trouble with UC Irvine serves, courtesy of Kelly Negron, who served 8 straight points. And eventually, that 8-7 lead grew into a 14-7 lead. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what just happened? And credit to Long Beach State, they were able to get 3 straight points to force a UC Irvine timeout, but it just was not meant to be, as UC Irvine took the fifth set 15-10, and that was the match. So, looking at the stats from a certain point, Kashana Williams did not have her best night for Long Beach State. She only had 8 kills. She also had 8 hitting errors, so she progressively got better, but it just was not enough. As Katie Kennedy led the way with 14 kills. As a team, Long Beach State hit 244, and then Erica Lovett and Tia Chavira each had 11 kills. Chavira also had 32 assists, and Kasia Partika also added 11 assists as well. And then in terms of digs, UC Irvine got outdug by Long Beach State 75-59, and yet they were unable to get the win, as Erica Lovett had 20 digs, and Jenna Giambi, who came in off the bench as a defensive specialist, had 15 digs, and Nicole Hoff chipped in 13 digs. As for UC Irvine, they were led by Joy Ume, who had 26 kills. She even hit 333. And I don't know how to pronounce her name. It's Oni Ofugubu. I'm not even going to pronounce that last name. Ofogubu. She had 15 kills. And then, like I said, Mariana Bartolone and Ellen Virgassen had 7 kills. But the unsung hero was indeed Kelly Negron, who had that serving run. She had 2 service aces, and she had 12 digs as well. So that was big. And UC Irvine was able to win despite hitting 185 on the night, which is quite impressive. If you're winning despite posting certain numbers or getting outdone in certain stats, then you're doing something right for your school. So good job to UC Irvine. Long Beach State did take a tough loss on the road. After the game, I caught up with UC Irvine coach Joy McKienzie-Fuerbringer following the loss to the Anteaters.
All right, so obviously this was a tough loss to UC Irvine on the road in the Black and Blue Rivalry. What do you think you liked in this match despite the loss?
I liked our girls fight consistently throughout the match. I thought, we stayed in it, had long rallies. We just, in the end, they got in a pretty good serving run and we couldn't execute.
Katie was your kill leader with 14, and then Erica and Tia also had 11 kills apiece. What can you say about those three and how they led the way for you all? Well,
yeah, I think our outsides have had great days. I think the one thing that stood out to me today a lot was our middles. Miranda hit a 417 and Cam hit a 400. I thought maybe we could have used them a little bit more because, UCI did a really good job blocking against us. But pretty, we had a pretty good spread offense, which I was impressed with.
The serves were kind of not in your favor as you only had 3 aces and 11 service errors. Do you think that might be something you might be cleaning up before next week, or
of course, yeah. I think our matches that we're winning, we're doing a lot better on our serve and pass. Last night we won the serve and pass game. Tonight we did not. They had 8 aces and 7 errors, and we had 3 aces and 11 errors. So it's definitely something we're working on every day.
And then obviously you have games next week. What's it going to take to bounce back from this loss and attempt to come back and get some more wins for you all? Because the Big West Conference is all over the place with Davis beating UC Santa Barbara and whatnot. So.
Okay. For us it's getting a little bit of rest, tomorrow, and then getting back to business on Monday and keep improving. We want to improve 1% each day, and that's our focus, and we'll have little goals that we'll set for tomorrow going into next week.
So that was my interview with Joy McKienzie-Fuerbringer, Long Beach State women's volleyball coach, and I kind of agreed. I thought they could have utilized the middle blocker position much better, as Miranda Cañez and Cameron Bacon each had 6 kills, but only one of them had a hitting error, and as she mentioned, they both hit 400 plus, and I bet you they maybe would have gotten Kashana Williams a lot more in the mix, considering she was not having her best game, and they were just going to Kashana and then the right side and then Erica Lovett as well. So I think maybe for next time, Long Beach State should run the middle more, and then maybe make UC Irvine think, okay, they're running the middle, and then they could start veering away from that, then going to Kashana, then going to Katie Kennedy, then going to Erica Lovett, and then maybe have Tia Chavira doing her thing when it comes to getting kills, not just as the right side, but as a setter as well. So all in all, for Long Beach State, it was a difficult loss, and I kind of noticed that Kashana Williams had her hand taped up. I know volleyball players have their hands taped up, but something kind of had me thinking she was not 100%. I wanted to ask Joy McKienzie-Fuerbringer if Kashana Williams was a little banged up, because she was coming off of that big performance the previous night against UC San Diego, where she eclipsed the 1,000 kill mark. But I just didn't, because I felt the need. I didn't want to pry, and off of a tough loss like this, then I don't think it was necessary. So on the other side of things, I caught up with UC Irvine women's volleyball coach Ashlie Hain about the win over Long Beach State and what this meant for UC Irvine going forward.
I'll make this quick.
Okay.
Anyway, so your team is coming off of a thrilling 5-set win over Long Beach State. What can you say about this game, and what do you think stood out in this game for you all?
For us, I think just the resiliency of the group and the fight was the most exciting, especially with a young group. That's always something you like to see. There are 4 freshmen and 2 sophomores out there, so it's crazy to think that, the fact that they have that grittiness and competitiveness is why we recruited them. But just to be able to show that and beat a good team like Long Beach this early on in their careers it's really promising for the program.
Now, yesterday you were coming off of a tough loss to Fullerton. What do you think you did better in this game than you did in Fullerton? And what did you tell the team after the loss to the Fullerton game?
Everything is the short answer. We in every category we were better, and we knew that wasn't a great version of ourselves last night. So my message to the team was just, let's be the best version of ourselves tonight at home. Or a better version. That's not who we are. It's not who we want to be. And I think with young groups, you see things like that, a little, some bad games or maybe not the right mindset going into the match. But the fact that they overcame that and they felt bad about that loss and how they performed and were able to respond tonight. My other message to them has been, hey, it's not what happens, it's how you respond, because we are going to have these 3 or 4 years together. And so just see them respond like that tonight, I think that's huge growth for us.
Now, number 22 is obviously their big hitter out on Long Beach, and you all were just blocking her and making her force the errors. Do you think that was the game plan going in and limiting her to the best of your ability, because she hit 0?
Yeah, she's obviously a huge force, and we have a strong right side block, so the fact that we were able to execute that once we got going that it was a huge part of our game plan for sure.
Joy had 26 kills, and she hit .333, and you also got 15 kills from your middle. I'm not even going to pronounce that name.
Yeah.
What can you say about your offense and how Joy and Onie led the way?
Yeah, it's Oni Ofubu and...
Ofubu. Oni Ofubu. Got it. Anyway, back to the interview.
Joy, they're sophomores, so they played 1 season for us and then had that year off last year. And the fact that they're sophomores and able to have a performance like that's pretty incredible. I think their career here is, their future is really bright, and they're great people, and I think that makes them great players and just great leadership coming from them at such a young part of their careers. It's really exciting to see, and they worked really hard in the summer on their own at their fitness level to be able to put up those numbers, and they weren't able to do that as freshmen. Joy didn't even play her freshman year, so the fact that they took that year to really get better that's them, because we weren't together last year. So just really proud of those two.
And then obviously the Big West Conference is competitive, as also UC Davis beat UC Santa Barbara in 4. What's it going to take to climb the Big West Conference ladder and get some big wins to maybe help you win the conference or get into the tournament?
Yeah, I think one is staying healthy, because we've already had 3 key injuries, and we've been able to overcome those with freshmen coming in to step in, and so to see them do well is good. But staying healthy and being consistent in whatever you're doing, because we all had that year off. We're all learning on the fly as we go, so you have to be careful of everyone in the Big West every night and prepare for them, because people are still coming together as teams, even this late in the season, because we just got here in August after a year and a half off.
Anyone else who stood out to you in your mind other than Joy?
Oni. In the 5th set, I think Kelly Negron really stepped up. She basically took over that match at the service line, and she's a sophomore. So I thought that was really nice to see. She went on an 8-point serving run. So.
And that was my interview with Ashlie Hain, the UC Irvine women's volleyball coach. All in all, for UC Irvine, it was an impressive win, and I will remember that Oni's name is pronounced Oni Ofubu. And if I ever cover the Long Beach State UC Irvine women's volleyball
matchup the second go-around at Long Beach, I will be prepared to actually pronounce that name much better to the ability of her. So, all in all, this was a fun matchup, and I enjoyed this little rivalry game, and Long Beach does have a lot of work to do. They play UC Riverside on Friday, and then they also play UC Davis on Saturday. I mentioned to Joy and Ashlie that Davis upset UC Santa Barbara, and that was huge because now Hawaii's all alone in first place in the conference going into this week, and that's huge. And I'll be talking about that in a little bit later on the show. As for UC Irvine, they are hitting the road to Bakersfield on Friday, and then they'll be at Cal Poly on Saturday. So I look forward to seeing UC Irvine later on in the future, except most of their games, well, they have one 5 p.m. game, but it's against CSUN, and I'll probably be busy that day, which is a Saturday. So that's the struggle of some of these matches. They're 7 p.m. matches, which really stinks. But all in all, I enjoyed this matchup, and I enjoyed talking with Ashlie Hain. I wish I could have gotten more interviews, but I needed to jet ASAP because I needed to catch the bus to get on home. So all in all, I enjoyed that matchup between Long Beach State and UC Irvine, and hopefully if I do cover the second matchup between those two, it'll be an even bigger barn burner. The next matchup between those two is on November 20th, and it'll be at Long Beach State. So we'll see if the Beach can avenge its lone loss. But all in all, that is my quick little matchup for Long Beach State-UC Irvine, and I know it went a little bit longer, so now let's jump through the rest of the noteworthy matchups and upsets. So we'll start with the upsets, and this upset on Saturday was super significant, as UConn, the Huskies, the women's basketball school, they are not just a women's basketball school, they are also a women's volleyball school, as they upset Creighton, which was number 19 at the time, in 5 sets. As UConn was led by Kaylee Parker, who had 24 kills, and then Jasmine Davis had 13 kills as well. So it was just those two. They were the two-headed monster, but it just went to show you that UConn is capable of registering big-time victories. Some stats that stood out to me were Creighton and UConn had 90 and 85 digs, which was quite significant. And then UConn outblocked Creighton 11-9, and then Creighton was held to only 153, which was quite impressive. Like, the fact that they held Creighton to that low of a hitting percentage speaks to high volumes of how UConn did a great job of preparing for that match. And obviously it was tough for Creighton losing at UConn, but hey, that's the Big East for you. Nothing is guaranteed, just like the Big West Conference. No win is guaranteed, and every team can be taken down on any given night. Creighton was led by Nora Sis, who's having a stellar season despite being a freshman. She had 23 kills. Keely Davis and Jayla Zimmerman each added 13 kills. So that was that for Creighton. Again, it wasn't the best outing for the Blue Jays, but I think they'll be fine going forward. Obviously, them losing a second Big East matchup doesn't help them, and obviously they lost to, what's-their-face, St. John's, but Creighton's still okay. But something I did not know of UConn, they're 14-6 and 6-2 in the Big East. This is a team that could make some noise in the Big East going forward. And then jumping over to the Pac-12 on Sunday, we had UCLA versus Arizona State. Now, in this matchup, UCLA took the first 2 sets. I didn't even think this was going to be a noteworthy matchup. I see UCLA is up 2-0 on Arizona in the match, or Arizona State in the match. I also saw that Arizona State had to go 5 with USC 2 nights ago, and they lost in 5. And then I'm thinking, okay, Arizona State is not going to win this. UCLA has totally got this in the bag. Then Arizona State takes the second set 25-20, and it's like, okay, whatever. UCLA just had a blip in the road. Arizona State is scrappy. Then the fourth set, I saw Arizona State taking it 25-22, and I'm like, what? And then in the fifth set,
Arizona State was up 8-2, and then they were up 11-3, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what just happened? And eventually, Arizona State won the 5th set 15-8, reverse sweeping UCLA. And believe it or not, that was actually Arizona State's first win in a 5-set match. All their other 5-set matches, they lost. I could not believe it. It's like, dude, if you're UCLA, you kind of have to be kicking yourself on giving up that match. As we say hello to Gina G in the chat room, she says, hope you're having a great show. Best volleyball show on the planet, y'all. Thank you, Gina. I'll be talking about a little Stanford in a little bit, but for right now, I can't believe UCLA lost this matchup. It's like, it's Arizona State. Nothing against the Sun Devils, but they were 1-6 in Pac-12 play. You can't tell me this team, UCLA, with Mac May, who is an All-American, Charity Looper, who is one of the more up-and-coming freshmen, lost to Arizona State. I get it, it was on the road, but still, it's a bad loss. And because of this loss, UCLA is no longer all alone in first place. They're now tied with several other teams, which I'll be getting into a little bit. Anyway, so UCLA was led by Mac May, who had 20 kills. She did have 8 hitting errors and only hit 197, but she wasn't bad at all. She also got help from Charity Looper, who had 17 kills, but she had 11 hitting errors, so this is kind of a little concerning. And then Anna Donson added 11 kills in the middle, and then Shelby Martin also added 6 kills as well, to go along with her 43 assists and 12 digs. Like, some glaring stats that stood out to me were Arizona State's service aces. They out-aced UCLA 11-6. I didn't even know that was possible. And also, they held UCLA to under 200. UCLA hit 194, which is really surprising. And keep in mind, UCLA was coming off of a 3-0 victory over Arizona. And let me just tell you, Arizona is better than Arizona State. But after this, I don't know. I think Arizona State is sneaky good. As for the Sun Devils, they were led by Iman Isanovich, who had 17 kills. Marta Levinska had 13 kills. Jelly Sir had 11 kills, and she hit 300. And then Claire Jeter had 10 kills, and she hit 421. UCLA just barely outdug Arizona 76-75, and UCLA also outblocked Arizona State 13-11. And again, it's just so weird to see UCLA losing that match to Arizona in reverse sweep fashion. It was one thing that UCLA got reverse swept by Washington. That's a good loss, because Washington is a very good team. And it was on the road. But UCLA got reverse swept by Arizona State. It makes zero sense. Like, if UCLA wants to win this conference, they're going to have to do a better job of closing out some of these teams. I know all 3 of their matches, well, all 3 of their losses have come via 5 sets. But there comes a point where you got to close out in the 5th set. They have done a good job of winning certain matches, like the Washington State match. They came up big in, but you really cannot lose to these subpar teams, because that could eventually bite you in the butt going forward. Because if you're somehow like one game out of first place, that could be the difference between you winning the conference and you losing the conference. Because the Pac-12 is super competitive. It's not just UCLA that's good. It's several other teams that are good. One of which is Oregon. And speaking of Oregon, they also lost on Sunday as they got toppled by Washington State at Matt Knight Arena in straight sets. I am not kidding you. Washington State beat Oregon in straight sets in Eugene. That was rather surprising. Something that stood out to me. Oregon had no players in double digits via kills. And then, in terms of blocks, Washington State outblocked Oregon 10-5, which I was quite surprised at that. And they held Oregon to only a 91 hitting percentage. It was under 100. and that's no good. Washington State was led by Pia Timmer, who had 13 kills, while Magda Jelarova had 10 kills. Oregon was led by Brooke Nunaviller and Morgan Lewis, who each had 8 kills, while Gloria Mutiri and Carson Bacon each had 5 kills apiece. Now, Washington State is one of the more underrated teams. I think Washington State is a decent team. I don't think they're the best team, but they are not to be slept on. They played a very tough non-league schedule through their first 4 games. They played Purdue, they played Penn State, they lost a thriller to South Carolina, which they probably should have won, and then they lost to UNLV, which is an NCAA team from last season, which won an NCAA game. And then they eventually ripped off 8 in a row until they wound up losing to USC and UCLA, but ever since those 2 losses, Washington State has now won 4 in a row. So, all in all for Washington State, this was an impressive victory because guess what happened? Washington State is now atop the Pac-12 leaderboard with UCLA and a couple other teams, which is quite impressive. We also say hello to Pierre Moss, who says, the best volleyball show in the land. I appreciate it. Pierre, I just talked about the Big East and how UConn upset Creighton, which was UConn's first ever win over a ranked opponent. So, I don't know if you want to chime in on the Big East, but I know that's in your neck of the woods. So, impressive stuff for UConn, by the way. But for Washington State, I think they're starting to come in on as their own. Last year, they had quite the young team, but this year, most of that team returns, and they're a little bit older and a little bit more wiser. So, all in all, I think this Washington State team is not to be slept on. So, I'm very impressed with how Washington State has, able to rise above adversity and whatnot. So we'll see what happens with the Cougars going forward. But looking at the Pac-12 actually no, I won't look at the Pac-12 standings until after I'm done with recapping most of the volleyball matches from Week 8. So before Oregon lost to Washington State, they actually had another match against Washington. This was kind of their little rivalry game against Washington, as Oregon played Washington at Matt Knight Arena, and this was actually played on Thursday, and Oregon took the first 2 sets, and I'm thinking, okay, well, Oregon is probably going to win because Washington just doesn't have the consistency. No. Washington eventually took the 3rd and 4th set, and they never tied or trailed in sets 3 and 4. And then the 5th set, they just had all the momentum on their side, and despite receiving a tough battle from Oregon in that 5th set, Washington dominated and won it 15-8. It was kind of like the UC Irvine Long Beach State match, except Washington just had firm control in that 5th set after they rolled through that 3rd and 4th set. Washington was led by Claire Hoffman, who had 20 kills, while Maren Grote added 13 kills. Sam Drexel and Imoni Bush added 11 kills apiece. Now, Claire Hoffman stepping up is huge because when Sam Drexel is not having her best night or she's having a quiet night, that's when Washington needs to have other players step up. And then Grote also stepping up with only 1 hitting error and hitting 500 is absolutely amazing. Despite getting outdug 77-69, Washington did perform well, and despite getting out-hit 230-224, and then also getting out-blocked 13.5-10, Washington really held their own. One stat that does stand out to me when it comes to Washington and Oregon that actually went the way of Washington was the service aces. They had 4 aces from LMA Powell, which was absolutely amazing, and then 8 altogether. So I think that was the key for Washington, just serving a lot better. I would not be surprised if they adjusted their serves in the 3rd set and beyond, which was the turning point. Oregon was led by Brooke Nunaviller, who had 15 kills. Taylor Borup had 14 kills, and Gloria Mutiri had 11 kills. And then Abby Hansen added 9 kills. So that was a big win for Washington. If it wasn't for that win, they would not be atop the Pac-12 standings, which I'll be getting into a little bit. Now, this matchup was another matchup from the Pac-12, and this was also a Thursday match. This was kind of an upset as... Oh, by the way, that was number 10 Washington defeating number 13 Oregon. And I don't think that would have been an upset had Oregon won. I just think that would have been an impressive victory for Oregon, considering they've been up and down lately when it comes to their matches. So yeah, this on the other hand was not really an upset either, as number 17 Utah took on number 18 Stanford at Maples Pavilion. Stanford came out on top, winning 3-1. Stanford was led by Katie Baird, who was having an impressive season as she had 17 kills and hit .406. Kendall Kipp also added 14 kills and she hit .407. She and Baird were absolutely phenomenal, and that's when Stanford is at their best, when both of those two are hitting high percentages. And the weird thing is that Sammy Francis also chipped in 12 kills, but she only hit 162. So those were some stats that stood out to me, and I'm surprised the digs weren't rather high, as Utah had 40 digs and then Stanford had 39 digs. One thing that was high was the blocking totals, as Stanford outblocked Utah 13.5 to 11. The service ace and service error ratio wasn't in the favor of Stanford, but what was in the favor was the hitting percentage, as Stanford hit .307 compared to Utah's .202. Utah, on the other hand, was led by Danny Drews, who had 20 kills, but she had 10 hitting errors on 50 swings. Anneli Vanderwerf had 11 kills, and she only had 1 hitting error. Drews did have 2/5 of the Utah kills, which, again, this kind of goes to show you that Danny Drews is kind of doing it all for Utah. And if opposing teams do lock on and zoom in on Drews and shut her down, then it's kind of a mismatch for some of these other teams that are facing Utah. As Utah, once again, they have shown kind of some cracks in their consistency, as they have not been fully consistent. Every time they have a big win, they always show up the day later with a not-so-good loss. In this case, actually, they came off of a loss to UCLA and then wound up losing again to Stanford. I don't say again as in they lost to UCLA or they lost to Stanford for the second time, but I'm saying they lost for a second straight time in a row in Pac-12 play. So that's kind of what I meant. We'll come back to the Pac-12, but now let's jump to the West Coast Conference, where this school, San Diego, had 2 close victories over the weekend. So they played Pepperdine on Thursday, and they wound up winning in 5, and they barely won that one because Pepperdine is a gritty, resilient bunch. Other than that loss to Pacific, Pepperdine hasn't really lost too many matches to subpar opponents, as San Diego had to get a big game from Grace Froling and Katie Lukes, both of which had 21 and 20 kills apiece, and both hit .294 on the night. But that was pretty much it when it came to the kill leaders, as Grace and Katie had 41 out of the 55 overall kills from San Diego. Some glaring stats that did stand out to me was that Pepperdine outdug San Diego 72-57. But, on the flip side, San Diego outblocked Pepperdine 16-5, which that is a huge mismatch defensively. San Diego hit .245 on the night compared to Pepperdine's .226, and Pepperdine was led by Grace Chillingworth, a freshman, mind you, who had 22 kills. Rachel Ahrens did not have her best night, as she had 15 kills, but she had 15 hitting errors, which also goes along with San Diego's great blocking. And then Meg Brown and Emma Ammerman had 14 and 13 kills, but both hit in the 300s, which was quite nice. But all in all for Pepperdine, it was just a heartbreaking loss. They worked so hard to force that 5th set, and then they worked hard to stay with San Diego throughout most of that 5th set, but unfortunately, they fell just short. And then San Diego had another close call on Saturday where they faced LMU. Now, LMU, or Loyola Marymount is an underrated team. They have not had any standout victories, but I said on last week's show, LMU is very underrated, and that team is quite good, as they had 14 wins going into that match. They were 14-2 going into last week, and then unfortunately they lost to BYU on Thursday, and then they lost to San Diego. Yeah, I kind of spoiled it. So LMU took the first two sets 25-20 and 25-23, but then San Diego took the third set 25-16, the fourth set 25-23, and then the fifth set 15-11. All in all, for the Toreros, it was another big night for Grace Froling and Katie Lukes. Froling had 24 kills and Lukes had 21 kills. That was 45 out of the 57 overall kills for San Diego between Lukes and Froling. As some other stats that kind of stood out to me were the blocking again. San Diego outblocked LMU 17-7, which was quite impressive. LMU outdug San Diego 55-47, and LMU got out-hit by San Diego 270-193, as LMU was led by Megan Rice, who is a great two-way volleyball player. She plays on the beach, and she also plays indoors. She had 21 kills, but she had 11 hitting errors, but not that bad. Audrey Klemp had 16 kills as well. So LMU is still looking for that big breakout win. If they can get that big breakout win the second time around when they play San Diego, or they face Pepperdine, or they face BYU, that can get them into the postseason, because they don't have a ranked win. All of their losses are to ranked opponents, which is, like I said, the big three of the West Coast Conference, and then their other loss was to Purdue. But LMU is not a bad team whatsoever. Like, their best win is against Kansas, which was receiving votes. So that just speaks to high volumes of how LMU needs a big-time victory. So I said I was going to circle back to the Pac-12. I'll be circling back after I get done with these two matchups. So circling back to Friday's matchup, we had a Big Ten matchup, a big Big Ten matchup between number 7 Ohio State and number 6 Purdue. And Ohio State was able to avenge its earlier loss to the Boilermakers, as the Buckeyes defeated Purdue in Columbus in 4 sets. The Buckeyes were led by Mia Grunzy, who had 17 kills, or Grunzy, however it's pronounced. Emily Landot had 13 kills, Gabby Gonzalez had 12 kills, and Riley Rader had 11 kills. The kill leaders were very balanced, as also Arica Davis had 7 kills to boot as well, which was really impressive for Purdue, and I think, or not Purdue, Ohio State, because when you're having a balanced attack like that, it makes it so much more difficult for the other team to stop them. As Ohio State also outdug Purdue 71-57, and despite getting outblocked 19-9, they also hit a little bit better, 182-176, as Ohio State just put together a strong overall performance. Purdue was led by Caitlin Newton, who had 16 kills, Grace Cleveland had 11 kills, and Raven Colvin had 9 kills. But it wasn't enough, as Purdue lost to Ohio State. But on Sunday, Purdue was able to bounce back and take a big 5-set win over Penn State. Now, this win over Penn State meant a lot, because that was actually nationally televised. I forgot to mention this last week. Purdue and Penn State were nationally televised, and that was the second regular season matchup that got nationally televised on ESPN2, as the first matchup was Notre Dame and Ohio State. And how fitting that this matchup actually went 5 sets as well, just like Ohio State and Notre Dame. So for Purdue, they were led by Caitlin Newton, who had 26 kills. She was the only player in double figures in terms of kills, as Grace Cleveland added 9, Raven Colvin added 8, and Madeline Koch had 7 kills. In terms of digging, the digs were rather high, as both teams had 75 and 76, with Purdue leading the way. In terms of blocks, surprisingly enough, Penn State actually outblocked Purdue 9-8, which wasn't bad. Both the service errors and aces were rather the same, but this was kind of the mind-blowing stat. Well, not really mind-blowing, but this was the rather fascinating stat. Purdue only hit 198 compared to Penn State's 230, and honestly, I thought Purdue would have hit better, but the fact that they're hitting that low and still winning is kind of amazing. So, for Penn State, they were led by Johnny Parker, who had 23 kills, but she did hit 194, but it's not too bad, as Caitlin Horde also took some of the pressure off of her as she had 20 kills. She only had 2 hitting errors, which was quite nice. And then Angelina Stark had 11 kills. I also got to give it up for Jenna Hampton, who had 26 digs, and she was making sure every ball did not hit the floor, as she was even running into the... I don't think she was running into the ladder of the head referee, but she was like running into the other like side of the volleyball pole and whatnot. So all in all, for Penn State, they could not get the big win on the road as they fell further behind in the Big Ten standings. And that was pretty much that for all the noteworthy matchups right there. The Big Ten is still being led by Nebraska, but despite Nebraska having that win over Penn State, they haven't really faced anyone that makes me say, oh my god, Nebraska actually could be contenders. They haven't really faced anyone in terms of the Big Ten outside of Penn State. They'll get that matchup we've been waiting for later on the show. I'll be going over that. But to circle back to the Pac-12, this is probably the most competitive Power 5 conference. This is the conference that does not have an undefeated team in conference play, as UCLA, Washington, Stanford, and Washington State are all 6-2 amongst the Pac-12, which is very impressive. I think that conference is going to be a fight to the finish. It's going to be a dogfight, and there may be co-conference champions, which could determine which team gets the at-large spot and which team gets the automatic qualifier. And then also in the Pac-12, Utah and USC are 5-3. USC beat the Arizona schools last weekend, and then Utah obviously had that stumbling loss to Stanford, but then they rebounded and beat Cal. So all in all, for Utah, there's still plenty of season for them to turn it around. But for them, I don't think I don't know. Utah draws me up as rather mind-blowing. Like, sometimes they'll have a big win, and then sometimes they'll have a head-scratching loss. And then USC is still trying to come into its own. I'm certain they'll get another ranked win. Last weekend, like I said, they beat Colorado, which was number 24 or 25 at the time. This week, SC and UCLA take on the Oregon schools. Like, I'm certain USC can get another. I would not be surprised if USC beat another ranked opponent later on the season, as I think they can. I think USC just needs a little bit more time, and they did go back to putting Shannon Scully back to libero, which I guess is working. And then Brooke Botkin and Candace Denny are both leading the offense. Candace Denny is kind of a surprise, as she wasn't seen early on, but now she's come alive. And Amelia Vesca has been doing great things for the Trojans offense as well, because I still believe in SC, just like how I still believe in Notre Dame. I think those two teams still have it in them, despite the rocky start in the non-conference season. But all in all, for this week, last weekend, it was a great weekend, filled with all kinds of drama and upsets and reverse sweeps and five-setters. I think this is shaping up to being a close race when it comes to some of the conference races. And the Pac-12 is definitely going to be a fight to the finish. I really think it could come down to the final week of the regular season. I don't know who will win it all, because you have UCLA, which is still up there. You have Washington, which is starting to play certainly better. And then Stanford is up there still. And then Washington State is a team that is not to be slept on. And also, you can't sleep on Oregon. I forgot that Oregon is also 5-3 as well. I've just been seeing Oregon atop the standings for quite some time, until this past weekend, where they lost to both the Washington schools, and then last week when they lost to Utah. So we'll see what happens when it comes to Oregon, Utah, and USC at 5-3, and then UCLA, Washington, Washington State, and Stanford. So there are some noteworthy Pac-12 games, and we'll see which teams will come out on top in the second half of the show. But that's going to do it for the recap of last weekend's games. We'll take a quick little commercial break. When we come back, we'll preview some of the noteworthy games for this weekend, and then I'll send you all on your way. So you're listening to Set Point here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all of that sports. We'll be right back after this.
What is going on, everybody? My name is Harrison Glazer, and we're coming at you from the Show That Never Sleeps podcast. I cover the Jets, the Islanders, the Nets, and the Yankees.
This is Pierre Moss, and I cover the Mets, Knicks, Rangers, and the Giants.
Our show is live every Wednesday through Spreaker and a bunch of other ways to get our content. Again, we're the Show That Never Sleeps podcast. We talk about all those New York sports. It's a lot of fun. We get into all of it. Please tune in. Again, that's Wednesdays at 6 p.m.
And we look forward to having you guys right here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports.
Sports fans, do you like teams that are tough, cities that are tougher, and fan bases that are passionate about their teams? How about teams that are historic and stadiums that are iconic? Then you belong in Chicago, and you need to check out Chi-Town Weekly. Join me, Adam Kernan, every week as we keep up with all things Chicago sports. Bears, Bulls, Blackhawks, Cubs, White Sox. We'll cover them all, plus more. The Windy City is always buzzing, and we'll keep you up on all the big games and major stories. So tune in to Chi-Town Weekly every week right here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports.
What's good, fight fans? It's your boy, Marcus Los Rate, here to give you what you want, here to give you what you need. Yeah, man. Yeah. I'm coming to you live, straight from your mama's basement with a crispy, awesome white tea. We're coming to you live every Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Powered by IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports.
Back with segment number 2 of Set Point. You can check out all of our amazing shows on several different streaming platforms, such as Spreaker, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Podcast Addict, even Geo7. And you can also catch this show on several different streaming platforms, including iHeartRadio. And also, just as a little update for you all, for those that are listening live. There will be timestamps when it comes to this show. I will put the timestamps in on all of the streaming platforms such as Spreaker and YouTube. I think if I put the timestamps on Spreaker, it'll carry over to the other streaming platforms. I just have to do it manually for YouTube, so that's that little spiel out of the way. But segment number 2 of Set Point is underway. So I'm going to skip talking about high school volleyball, and I'm just going to jump into this coming week. So week 9, we have quite a number of good matchups. It won't start until the weekend, hence this title being called On Weekends We Watch Volleyball. There is a couple of noteworthy matchups on Thursday, as those 2 matchups will come from the Big Ten. As on Thursday, before I get to those matchups, however, I need to go over the top 25, and how could I forget the top 25? Oh my goodness. So, top 25. So, 25 through 21 include 25 Pepperdine, 24 Creighton, 23 Florida, 22 Washington State, and 21 San Diego. 16 through 20 include Tennessee at 20, West Kentucky at 19, Utah at 18, UCLA at 17, and Oregon at 16. 11 through 15 include Stanford at 15, Penn State at 14, Georgia Tech at 13, Minnesota at 12, and Baylor at 11. 6 through 10 include Washington at 10, Nebraska at 9, BYU at 8, Purdue at 7, and Ohio State at 6. Then 5 through 1 includes Kentucky at 5, Pitt at 4, Wisconsin at 3, Louisville at 2, and then your number 1 team in the nation is... you already know it. It's going to be Texas. So that is the top 25 of this week. So now let's jump on into the women's volleyball matches to watch for in week 9. So Thursday we have 2 semi-noteworthy matches. Like, the noteworthy matchups I have are on Thursday are number 1 Texas at Iowa State. And then I also have number 1 Baylor at West Virginia. Iowa State and West Virginia are right behind Texas and Baylor, so this could be a potential trap game for both Baylor and Texas, as in a couple more weeks they have the Baylor and Texas will be facing one another, and they can't look too far ahead. If I remember correctly, I think Baylor also has a bye week next week, so for Baylor, they can't afford to look too far ahead, especially since they have that 1 loss to Texas Tech. That is already hurting them in the Big 12 standings. So, and then Texas also got a challenge from Kansas. I mean, Kansas got the early jump on them, and then Texas was able to take the next 3 sets, and then they swept the next matchup. So, for Texas, they kind of have to be careful. I don't think Texas is in any danger, as Texas has been number 1 from the get-go ever since the beginning of the season, and it's quite impressive, as that has been that for those 2 matchups right there on Thursday. So now we jump to Friday's matchups, as we have a lot of matchups on Friday. So I'll start with the ones that aren't necessarily the biggest matches, but still have some impact. So the first matchup that isn't big but has some impact, or the sneaky good matchup, is number 4 Pitt at Notre Dame. Now, Notre Dame has not been the best this season, and they are not 500, and they also had a tough loss to Wake Forest. Like, I could not believe they lost to Wake Forest, but there's still a possibility they could make the playoffs. It's just that they're going to need to play a little bit better, because Notre Dame has had a rough non-conference season, and they aren't really the favorite to win the ACC. I hate to say it, but they just aren't. So, especially with that shoddy of a record. And the thing for Notre Dame is they have to finish 500. And with 10 games remaining, I think it's doable. But some of their schedule does get tough, starting this week when they play Pitt. And Pitt obviously is the tougher team. But something to note is that Pitt lost to Notre Dame last season. Well, that was kind of last season. But for Notre Dame, they returned most of their team. And then for Pitt, they also returned most of their team, except most of that team from last season for Pitt was in the Elite Eight. So for Pitt, they kind of have to be on their A game, and if Notre Dame wants to somehow pull off this win over Pitt, they're gonna have to play mistake free. They're gonna have to serve and pass, and they're gonna have to make sure that they take the pressure off of Charlie Nigo and Caroline Muth. Like, maybe get their middles involved more, because they rotate their three middles all around. So we'll see what happens between Pitt and Notre Dame. And then also, this is also another sneaky good matchup. Arkansas at number 5 Kentucky. Now, Arkansas is an improved team, but against Kentucky, some will say this is a mismatch, but Arkansas could give Kentucky a battle. I wouldn't say it's a guaranteed lock, but Kentucky has proven to be a little human at times. It's just going to be a lot tougher for Arkansas to do so. But if Arkansas does pull off the upset over Kentucky, then that would definitely help out their NCAA chances. Because remember, Arkansas was one of 4 teams that were the first 4 out of the NCAA tournament. And keep in mind, last year's NCAA tournament was a field of 48 as opposed to the standard field of 64. So for Kentucky, this could also be viewed as a trap game, as Kentucky also plays Arkansas Saturday for the second of a 2-game series. And this could also be a trap game because Kentucky has Tennessee next week, and those two are bitter rivals, I will say that. But Tennessee is much improved, so Kentucky cannot look ahead, especially with how the SEC has had so much parity, and how Kentucky almost lost to Mississippi State. Or, I'm sorry, not Mississippi State, Ole Miss. So there's something to note right there. Now for the more noteworthy matchups. And we'll start from the bottom. We'll start with this matchup from the Big West Conference. Hawaii at UC Santa Barbara. Now, Hawaii has been a tough team to take down at the Stan Sheriff Center. However, when it comes to playing at Santa Barbara, that could be another story. 2 seasons ago, they swept UC Santa Barbara at UC Santa Barbara, but can they beat the Gauchos again? They have had some inconsistencies. They had to go 5 with Fullerton. They had to go 4 with UC Irvine. I imagine Hawaii will win, but I would not be surprised if Santa Barbara came out swinging and came out fired up, because this is for first place in the Big West Conference. The loss to UC Davis does not do the Gauchos any good, just because Hawaii is a talented team, and the fact that UC Santa Barbara lost to UC Davis last Saturday is kind of head-scratching. I still can't believe that, because that might have been the case of UC Santa Barbara looking too far ahead, or it could also be the case that UC Davis is underrated, or it could be the case that UC Santa Barbara rolled right into a trap game. Regardless, UC Santa Barbara has to play on point if they want to beat Hawaii. We'll see, though. All right, so now for some of the more noteworthy matchups. Starting in the West Coast Conference, now we got the ranked on ranked matchups. Now we're going to get into the fun matchups. Number 21 San Diego at number 8 BYU. So also big shout out to Larry B, who said the best darn volleyball show ever, and Pierre Moss said the best volleyball show in the land. I appreciate it. Now let's jump to the West Coast Conference. San Diego at BYU. This is going to be the battle of 2 unbeaten teams in the West Coast Conference. To me, I think this is going to be an evenly matched battle, as you have San Diego, who has the 2-headed monster in Katie Lukes and Grace Froling. But you also have BYU, who has Kenzie Kerber and a few other talented players on their team as well. To me, I think BYU is kind of favored in this matchup just because, one, they're playing at Provo. That's always a tough place to win at. And then number 2, BYU returns practically its entire young core. So that young core that was consisted of freshmen and sophomores from last year is pretty much grown up. And I think adding certain transfers from last season really helps the Cougars out. I wouldn't be surprised if San Diego were to pull off the win, but San Diego is they don't really have that factor that says they will beat a top 10 team. Yes, they have a win over UCLA, but that loss to Long Beach State kind of leaves a bad taste in my mouth. And then the fact that they also had to go 5 with LMU and Pepperdine, and the fact that they also had to reverse sweep LMU also kind of speaks high volumes into the fact that San Diego can be a little inconsistent. A little, though. I don't really think that... I think San Diego will give them a battle, but I think BYU will come out on top ultimately. I'll eat my crow if I have to, though, but we'll see. Now jumping to the Power 5 conferences, starting with the Pac-12, we have number 15 Stanford at number 22 Washington State. This is another test for Washington State. And Washington State and Stanford are both atop the Pac-12 standings, so one of these teams will be slipping down in the standings, while the other team will be staying atop for the time being. And for Washington State, this will prove if their win over Oregon is in fact for real. And also their win over Washington as well. And then for Stanford, this is kind of their chance to possibly win against an opponent that's kind of ranked under them. But this could also be a trap game for Stanford just because Stanford also plays Washington on Sunday. So for Stanford, they kind of have to mind their P's and Q's. They have to make sure Katie Baird and Kendall Kipp have the support that they need. I really think that Stanford will win, but that Washington State team is not to be slept on. Don't underestimate them at any point. Just because Washington State has, like I said, they played a tough schedule, and they won 8 in a row, and they lost to the California schools in USC and UCLA, and now Washington State has won 4 in a row, and they play the Northern California schools. So, and the best part is that Washington State is back at home in Pullman, so we'll see. Elsewhere in the Pac-12, we have number 16 Oregon at number 17 UCLA. This is also a noteworthy matchup just because it's another big Pac-12 game. This is kind of Oregon's chance to rewrite its wrongs just because, Oregon lost 2 in a row this past weekend to the Washington schools. The first one, it was against a tough Washington team. They got reverse swept. And then the second one, they don't really have much of an excuse as they lost in straight sets at home to Wazoo. So for Oregon, this is the you got to prove yourself matchup. And for UCLA, this is also you kind of got to prove yourself because UCLA had an embarrassing loss to Arizona State, which I still am so flabbergasted at. Just because UCLA was up 2-0 in the match, and they wound up getting reverse swept by Arizona State. Ugh. So for both these teams, this is the you got to prove yourself matchup. I expect Mac May and Charity Looper to come out on top, but don't sleep on the Oregon team just because Oregon also knows that it can't afford too many Pac-12 losses, especially with how the Pac-12 is just becoming a big log jam for first place. And then second place is pretty much starting to pile up as well. So there's that little matchup. The next matchup, as we head to the Big Ten, consists of number 14, Penn State at number 12, Minnesota. This is still on Friday's noteworthy matchups. Penn State had a tough loss to Purdue, and they kind of can't afford too many losses at this point in the Big 12, especially if they want to keep pace with Nebraska. So for Penn State, they have to take on another tough Minnesota team. And this is kind of going to be a homecoming because some of Minnesota's players are on Penn State and vice versa. So for Minnesota, a couple weeks ago, they did have a tough loss against Michigan. I was very surprised that they lost to Michigan. I thought Minnesota was better than that. So all in all, for the Golden Gophers, they cannot afford to lose at home too many times because they're still behind the 8 ball in terms of the Big Ten standings. They're behind Wisconsin. Like I said, they're also behind Nebraska, who has not lost a Big Ten game. So we'll see what happens when it comes to the Gophers and the Nittany Lions. And the final noteworthy matchup, and this is probably the big-time matchup, is number 6 Ohio State at number 3 Wisconsin. This is going to be a fun matchup. It's the battle of two top 10 teams, and these two teams never met last year. They almost met in the Elite Eight, but unfortunately Ohio State lost to Florida in 4 sets, which was disappointing. This is going to be a great matchup between the Badgers and the Buckeyes. If I remember correctly, the Badgers and the Buckeyes both split their matchup with each other 2 seasons ago. Again, this would have been a great matchup last season. The up-and-coming Ohio State Buckeyes taking on the heralded and praised Wisconsin Badgers, who was one of the favorites last year until they fell apart in that Final Four match to Texas. So for Wisconsin, this is kind of, you got to win this game in order to stay atop the standings. For Ohio State, this is the matchup of you also got to win in order to keep pace and get your at-large bid, because Ohio State doesn't have too many bad losses. They do have the loss to Penn State, and they do have the loss to Purdue, but they could still win the Big Ten. So, all in all, for the Buckeyes, if they could get this win, that would be golden for them. I would not be surprised, just because Ohio State has beaten Wisconsin. It's just that now it's not too surprising if the Buckeyes were to win, because the last time Ohio State beat Wisconsin, Wisconsin was ranked in the top 10, and then Ohio State wasn't even remotely close to being ranked. Now Ohio State is getting the recognition that it rightfully deserves, and now it is amongst the top 10, and they're proving it within some of their wins. So that's all of Friday's noteworthy matchups. Let's jump to Saturday. So let's start with this little matchup right here. Number 20 Tennessee at LSU. LSU has not lived up to its expectations this season. I thought LSU was a lot better than when it came into the season. That's because they had Kylie DeBerg, a transfer from Missouri, who's also going to be playing beach volleyball for LSU. But LSU is kind of underachieved. But in this matchup against Tennessee, I would not be surprised if Tennessee was flying right into a trap game. As the Vols, like I said, next week they have Kentucky, which that could be a matchup that could sway the SEC to Tennessee, but at the same time, that could also be a matchup that Tennessee could be looking too far ahead at, because Tennessee faces LSU on Saturday, then on Sunday. So in order for them to get to that big-time matchup against Kentucky, they have to get past this tough LSU team. And LSU does have a bunch of heavy hitters. It's not just Kylie DeBerg. It's many, many other players as well. So, and the same can be said for Tennessee. Like, they're having a solid season, and other than the loss to Texas A&M, I think Tennessee they will for sure make the NCAA tournament. Like, the only thing I would be surprised at is if Tennessee, barring any bad losses, like, is the last 4 in. So I think I'm really high on Tennessee this season. I think they have a lot of expectations. I think they've been playing certain teams tough, and I think this could be the Tennessee team that could dethrone Kentucky. But I won't guarantee it. I want to see it actually happen for Tennessee. Now back to the Big Ten. We have 2 noteworthy matchups in the Big Ten on Saturday, starting with number 14 Penn State at number 3 Wisconsin. It's another big-time matchup for the Badgers and the Nittany Lions, as the Lions are going to try to possibly build off of what could be their win on Friday. But that's a tough turnaround for Penn State, as they have to go from Minnesota all the way to Wisconsin, and that's a tough turnaround. On back-to-back nights, mind you. So, all in all, I would not be surprised if Penn State got tired legs. Like, this would be Wisconsin's match to lose, but at the same time, I don't think Wisconsin should overlook Penn State. Penn State has some studs, and Russ Rose is a mastermind. Like, the dude has been coaching ever since I've been in diapers. So that's that for the first matchup the first noteworthy ranked-on-ranked matchup. And then for Saturday, we have number 7 Purdue at number 9 Nebraska. This is the matchup that I was talking about of Nebraska needs to really show itself. Nebraska is a very good team, and I do admit them being undefeated in the Big Ten is impressive, but they now got to prove to themselves that they belong in first place in the Big Ten, as they're facing a tough Purdue team coming off of a 5-set win over Penn State. The good thing for Nebraska is that they will have their the home court advantage, and they'll have their fans in Lincoln. And Nebraska is one of the tougher places to win at. Wisconsin is too, but Nebraska has passionate fans, and it's super loud in Nebraska. I would not be surprised if Purdue lost, but if Purdue runs their two-headed monster in Caitlin Newton and Grace Cleveland, I expect Nebraska to snuff that out rather quickly, just because they've had some great victories, but honestly, if it's just those two, Nebraska's going to snuff it out just because it's so obvious to shut down a two-headed monster. Nebraska, on the other hand, has a lot of options, and they're starting to get their underclassmen more involved, such as their freshmen. And if those freshmen are fully bought into John Cook's system, then boy howdy, that Nebraska team is going to be tough going forward. So we'll see if Purdue can prove itself and hand Nebraska its first loss, or if Nebraska will be staying undefeated. I imagine Nebraska is going to be facing Wisconsin coming up soon, but I'm not going to look that far ahead. Those are all the Saturday noteworthy matchups. Now let's jump to Sunday, where I only have 3 noteworthy matchups. Also got to include that LSU and Tennessee are facing one another at LSU. But on Sunday, the noteworthy matchup number 1 is Stanford at Washington, going back to the Pac-12. So for Stanford, it's another one of those matches where you could topple a giant. For Washington, this is kind of the don't let yourself lose to an opponent ranked under you. And this could determine who stays in first place and who slips down to second place, depending on what happens with Stanford and Washington State. And then Washington also needs to keep an eye out for Cal, but no one's really threatened by Cal. No offense, Cal, of course. But for Washington, I think for them, it's a big-time matchup. It's at home. They're facing a tough Stanford team. Stanford remembers Washington quite well, as Washington was able to defeat them. And Stanford cannot afford any foul-ups against Washington, just because the Huskies are really good. And although Washington doesn't really have the true standout wins to prove it, I think that Washington can defeat Stanford at Washington. But don't be surprised if Stanford pulls out the win, just because their players are starting to come into their own. And Sammy Francis is vastly underrated, and she's only a freshman, so we'll see what happens. Back to the Big Ten, the noteworthy matchup on Sunday for the Big Ten consists of number 6 Ohio State at number 12 Minnesota. It's another road matchup for the Buckeyes, as they're facing a tough, defensive-minded Minnesota team. I think that could go either way, just because Minnesota is vastly underrated in the Big Ten. I think Minnesota doesn't really get the respect it rightfully deserves. Yes, they still remain in the top 15, top 20-ish, but for me, I think Minnesota is a lot better than what its record indicates, just because they have lost a few games here and there. And then Minnesota did lose some players to graduation, but once again, that defense of theirs really stands out, and they're the definition of you don't need to score points or have a bunch of kills in order to put up big numbers. Now, for Stephanie Samity, she is a phenomenal player, but she cannot do it all by herself. Samity just cannot carry the team to victory. If that's the case, then Ohio State will win easy. Because once Ohio State figures out, they're just going to feed it to Samity every single time, they'll eventually
zoom in on her, they'll lock in on her, whatnot, and then dig her, do all that good stuff. So for Ohio State, if they just play balanced and they keep Minnesota on their toes and they watch the block, I think that Minnesota should not be able to handle Ohio State. But that's going to be a great matchup whatsoever. And then for the matchup of the week, and this is the biggest matchup of this weekend and all of this week, it has to be number 4 Pitt at number 2 Louisville. The clash in the ACC. Now, this is a big-time matchup, and if it weren't for Pitt losing to Georgia Tech last weekend, I think this would be a really, really good matchup. This would be a battle for first place, who would be all alone in first place between Pitt and Louisville. For Pitt, this is kind of the matchup of if they win, they will have some company in first place. For Louisville, they kind of had some tough bumps in the road with Syracuse and Miami, but Miami is good, and the entire ACC as a whole has improved, with the exception of a couple other teams. But for Louisville, this is going to be a matchup of can they slow down Kayla Lund, Chinazi Ende, Sabrina Starks, all those players. And then for Pitt, this is going to be the matchup of can they win on the road in a hostile environment. This is the matchup that should be put on prime time. This should be the matchup that should be televised nationally. And to add to last week's matchup between Penn State and Purdue, there should be more nationally televised women's volleyball matches. I don't think NCAA women's volleyball gets the national credit that it truly deserves. And the United States has really good women's volleyball teams. They have a great women's beach volleyball team, they have a great women's indoor volleyball team, and they have a great women's sitting volleyball team. So all in all, for nationally televised volleyball matches, I would like to see more of that. I know ESPN loves their money and they love their ratings, but all in all, for growing the game of volleyball, I am all for that. I want to see more of that NCAA women's volleyball matches televised nationally. But we'll have to see what happens in the near future. But that's going to do it for all of the noteworthy matches to watch for this week. And that is going to do it for this week's episode of Set Point. I appreciate everybody tuning in, and without any further delay, it is that time, ladies and gentlemen, to drop that beat, as I'm about to dip like a banana in chocolate. You feel me? Thank you very much for tuning in to Set Point this week. I appreciate you all tuning in. If you are listening live, I appreciate you. If you're listening on the playback, I appreciate you. Like I said, there will be timestamps available in the description if you have not listened at this point. At the moment right now, it is currently 6:30 Pacific time, but that is sudden. The point is, I appreciate everybody tuning in. Thank you to the chat room on Spreaker, Pierre Moss, David Brooks, Gina G, and Larry B for tuning in. I appreciate you. Gina says, great show, Teran. I appreciate you. Appreciate the kind words, and I appreciate the support from everybody who has supported Set Point and all of IE Sports Radio. So definitely do give us all a listen, because we are by the people, for the people. For everyone here at IE Sports Radio, this is Teran Rodriguez signing off. You all have yourself a great rest of the week. Enjoy the volleyball matches that will be happening on the weekend, and I will be seeing you Friday for the SoCal Supreme Sports Show. Peace!